Today I will be ranking the best and worst AMD CPUs for gaming in 2024. My name is Valentino and you will have my favorite AMD CPU recommendations down in the video description, and in this tier list I will go over every CPU from AMD that you can buy right now in the market, and there are some CPUs that are not in the list and I will talk about the reason in a second. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoy, and if you find valuable information throughout this one, subscribe to the channel. And I actually love making tier list videos. With that being said, let's start. So we are going to be ranking these CPUs in terms of gaming, so no content creation involved, just pure price to performance value when it comes to gaming. So the first one that I'm going to rank is the Ryzen 5 3600. Now this one is an old CPU, but it's still amazing on a budget. It used to be the mid-range king like the Ryzen 5 5600 is right now, but in terms of performance it is basically the same as the Ryzen 5 5500. Right now you can get it at the same price as the 5500 brand new, so in my opinion this one is V tier. It used to be S tier back in the day, but as of right now I do believe that it's V tier, just because it is not brand new and it is not a mid-range CPU anymore, because you have limited options when it comes to your GPU choice. So I would pair this CPU up to the RX 6700 XT or RTX 4060. I wouldn't pair it with anything higher end than those two GPUs, because I do believe that it's going to bottleneck. Now the Ryzen 5 5500 is basically the same CPU and it's going into my V tier as well, but one level above the Ryzen 5 3600 just because it's newer. It's the same 6-core 12-thread processor, very similar in terms of performance, so V tier, just one level above the 3600. Now the Ryzen 5 5600 is going into my A tier. I do believe that this one is still, until this day, one of the best mid-range CPUs if you have $800 or less to spend in your entire system. This one is great and you can pair it up to the RTX 4070 or RX 7800 XT, which both are very nice 1440p GPUs. So in my opinion this one is still an amazing CPU, and it would be once again on my S tier if we didn't have the new Ryzen 7000 series processors. So if you have this CPU or you are thinking of buying one because you are working on a tight budget and you need a mid-range CPU, this one is great. Then we have the Ryzen 5 7500F from the new AM5 platform. This one is going into my S tier. The reason why it is on my S tier is because of its price to performance. It is very similar in terms of price compared to the Ryzen 5 7600, and it is going for around 125 to 130 bucks on Aliexpress. Just keep in mind that those CPUs usually do not come with the stock cooler from AMD, so you will have to spend around $20 to get an aftermarket CPU cooler, so the total price might be around 145 to 155 bucks. Definitely great value, and the nice part about this CPU is that it's on the AM5 platform, which means that if you have the right motherboard, well, down the line you can upgrade up to a Ryzen 7 7800 X3D or the new Ryzen 8000 series coming out pretty soon. So great CPU with good upgradability if you have the right motherboard. Then we have the Ryzen 5 7600, which is going to my A tier, one level above the 5600. This one is going for 180 bucks, and since you can buy it from Amazon and other retailers in the US, the delivery time might be faster than the Ryzen 5 7500F, which comes from Aliexpress from China. So it has some pros compared to the Ryzen 5 7500F. It also comes with the stock cooler, but it is going to cost you around $30 to $40 more for basically the same level of gaming performance. And you can pair both the 7500F and the Ryzen 5 7600 up to the RTX 4080 Super or RX 7900 XTX, which both are two of the best GPUs out there, and the only graphics card that is better is the RTX 4090, but that one is much more expensive and I would never recommend you pairing an RTX 4090 with a mid-range CPU. So the Ryzen 5 7600 is basically the Ryzen 5 5600 from the new generation. It is great, you can pair it with most GPUs in the market, very powerful, and it is also very power efficient with a 65 watt TDP, which is amazing. So is the Ryzen 5 7500F. So both are great CPUs, and honestly, if you do not want to buy from AliExpress, you just want to buy from Amazon or any other retailer in the US, then the Ryzen 5 5 7600 is going to be your best option. This system right here has the Ryzen 5 7600 and I bought it just to play Fortnite and test it for you guys. So if you want to see the best affordable Fortnite gaming system, you will have that video in the top right of the screen with benchmarks as well. Now we have the Ryzen 5 7600X, which is slightly faster than the 7600, but honestly it is almost the same in terms of performance. This one is a bit more expensive for around $10 to $20 more, and it is not as power efficient. It has a higher TDP and it needs slightly better cooling. So the Ryzen 5 7600X is going into my A tier, but it is going to be one level below the Ryzen 5 5600 because of its price to performance and because of the fact that the Ryzen 5 7600 is a much better deal in my opinion for the reasons I've mentioned before. More power efficient, cheaper price, and honestly it is basically the same CPU. Then we have the Ryzen 7 5700X. This one is from the AM4 platform and I wouldn't recommend you buying this CPU if you are going to build an entirely new system. If you already have a PC with the AM4 platform, let's say you have a Ryzen 5 3600 and you want to upgrade, then it is going to be a nice CPU upgrade. I believe this one right now is going for around $150, but I have to check.
Much later.
So I just checked and it's going for $170, making it not a great option considering that you can get another AM4 CPU that's going to be better in terms of performance for a little bit more. So in terms of power consumption and performance, the Ryzen 7 5700X is actually a pretty good CPU. The price right now is not ideal. If you see it at $150, then it's a totally different story. But for $170, it is a nice deal, but it is not the best one. For that reason, is going into my V tier, but one level below the Ryzen 5 3600. Now the Ryzen 7 5700X3D is a totally different story because it is slightly more expensive than the Ryzen 7 5700X, but it's going to give you much faster performance and it is very similar in terms of gaming performance compared to the Ryzen 5 7600. But keep in mind that the 5700X3D is from the AM4 platform, which once again, if you already have a system with an AM4 CPU, then it is worth the upgrade. But if you're going to build from scratch, I highly recommend you going with AM5 motherboards and CPU. That way your system is much more upgradable over time and they have the better gaming performance anyway. So the 5700X3D, if you already have an AM4 if you are already on the AM4 platform, then it will be on my S tier because it is one of the best upgrades that you can make when it comes to gaming if you are in this platform. But since I'm ranking this in terms of price to performance overall and some people are not in the AM4 platform, then it's going into my A tier, one level below the Ryzen 5 7600X. Then we have the Ryzen 7 5700X, which is going for around the same price as the 5700X3D. As of right now, I wouldn't recommend you buying this CPU. If you already have this one, don't get me wrong, it's going to achieve great performance, but I just wouldn't buy it for the same price as the Ryzen 7 5700X3D because it's slower. It also consumes more power on average, so you need a bigger cooler. Overall, I do not like it, but since the level of performance is great and if you already have this CPU, you cannot complain basically, it's going into my C tier, not D tier, just because of the level of performance. With the next one, we have the Ryzen 7 5800X3D, which is going for almost $300 USD, and for that price, I wouldn't buy this CPU. It is the fastest CPU in the AM4 platform, but very similar in terms of performance compared to the Ryzen 7 5700X3D, which is $100 cheaper. So there's no reason on why you should buy the 5800X3D over the 5700X3D, especially considering that $300 is a very expensive price and you can get into the new AM5 platform with that amount of money. For that reason, it is going into my C tier, one level above the 5800X because it performs much better, but in terms of pricing right now, it is not there and I wouldn't recommend you buying it for $300 USD when you have the 5700X3D going for $200 instead. Then we have the Ryzen 7 7700. This is a great CPU from the AM5 platform. I do believe that it's not as great in terms of price to performance compared to the Ryzen 5 7600 just because it is almost $100 more expensive and it's not going to give you much, and in terms of gaming performance they are actually similar. The Ryzen 7 7700 is not going to give you a huge amount of improvement when it comes to gaming performance compared to the Ryzen 5 7600. 7600. So in terms of price to performance, not as great. Yes, this one has 8 cores compared to 6 cores from the Ryzen 5 7600, but when it comes to gaming, 6 cores versus 8 cores doesn't really make a difference. So I do not believe that the Ryzen 7 7700 is the best in terms of price to performance. For that reason, it is going into my V tier, one level above the Ryzen 5 5500, because it is on the AM5 platform, great performance, but in terms of pricing it is not the best, especially considering that you can either go cheaper with the Ryzen 5 7600 or you can go a bit more expensive and get the fastest CPU in the entire market, which I will mention in a second. Now, the Ryzen 7 7700X on the other hand is slightly faster, not as good in terms of power consumption compared to the Ryzen 7 7700, and at the moment is going for the same price as the 7700. And this one is slightly faster. Honestly, you will not notice a difference between the two, between the 7700 and the 7700X, but it consumes more power. So for that reason, it's going into my B tier again, one level below the 7700, but you can swap these two. It doesn't really make a difference here. Both are good CPUs. If you buy it, you are going to be happy with this one. You can pair it up to, once again, the RTX 4080 Super or RX 7900 XTX. So it's not like if you buy this CPU, you are going to be unhappy. Well, no, this is a great CPU, but it's just not there in terms of price to performance. And this one is the fastest CPU in the entire market, the Ryzen 7 7800 X3D from the AM5 platform, and straight into the S tier, one level above the Ryzen 5 7500F because of its performance. You compare this CPU up to the highest end GPU in the market, the RTX 4090, because this one is the fastest CPU in the entire market. And the crazy part is that it's not that much more expensive than the 7700. At the moment, it's about $40 to $50 more expensive, but honestly, in my opinion, it is worth the price difference if you want the best gaming performance when it comes to your CPU in the entire market. With this one, you can play games like Fortnite at 500 plus FPS on average if you pair it with the right graphics card. So you can really compete in esports shooters with this one, or you can play high-end simulators that usually consume a lot of CPU power, like Flight Simulator. So great CPU, S tier because of its performance, also because of its power consumption, which is not really that high, so you don't actually need a big cooler for it, and then the price is very decent. With the next one, we have the Ryzen 9 5900X. We are talking about gaming performance here. This one is just not there in terms of gaming performance. It is very expensive and is from the AM4 platform, so I just wouldn't recommend you buying it. Same for the Ryzen 9 5900X. They are going into my D tier, not because of its gaming performance, because the gaming performance is good, but there are much better CPUs out there in terms of price to performance, for example like the Ryzen 7 5700X 3D. Now, if we were talking about production work or content creation, then it would be a different story, but remember, this video is about CPUs for gaming, so we are ranking them in terms of price to performance for gaming. With the next one, we have the Ryzen 9 7900X. Same things happen here, but the performance is much better, and it is from the AM5 platform, so it is clearly not at the same level as the other ones, so it's not going into my D tier, but it is going into my C tier, one level above the 5800X, because it is better in terms of price to performance than the 5800X, but it is not ideal for gaming. If you want a gaming rig, just go with a Ryzen 7 7800X 3D. If you were thinking of a Ryzen 9 7900X, just because it says Ryzen 9 doesn't mean that it's going to be better when it comes to gaming performance. Then we have the Ryzen 9 7900X 3D, which is basically the same as the Ryzen 7 7800X 3D when it comes to gaming performance. In some cases, it is a bit slower, you will not notice a difference, and in terms of pricing, it's about $60 more expensive than the 7800X 3D. That being said, this CPU is actually good for gaming. I just wouldn't recommend you buying it right now because you have the Ryzen 7 7800X 3D and it's not going to give you any higher FPS on average, so this one is going into my B tier, one step above the Ryzen 5 5500, and just because it is on the AM5 platform and the level of performance is amazing. Now the Ryzen 9 7900X is going on my C tier as well with the 7900X, one level below it, just because it is much more expensive and it's not going to give you any gaming performance advantage. Remember, these CPUs are more for content creation than just gaming. Of course, you can play with them and they are great in terms of gaming performance, but I would only recommend you buying it if you are actually a content creator and you will use video editing applications. Otherwise, there's just no reason on why you should pick this one, especially if your main focus is gaming and you want the highest FPS possible. And last but not least, we have the Ryzen 9 7950X3D. This one is not as good as the Ryzen 7 7800X3D or the 7900X3D because of the price. This one I believe is going for around $600, so it's much more expensive, almost double the price compared to the Ryzen 7 7800X3D, and it's not going to give you any performance advantage. So this one is going once again into my C tier with the 7950X. So the C tier and D tier, you can reorder them if you want. Honestly, it doesn't really matter because I wouldn't recommend you buying them, especially when it comes to gaming performance, just because you have these two CPUs right here, the Ryzen 5 7500F and 7800X3D, which are much better when it comes to gaming performance. So if you're working with a mid-range budget, go with the 7500F or 7600. If you're working with more money and you want to buy an RTX 4090 or you want the fastest performance that you can get out of your CPU, then just get the 7800X3D and you will be fine. Let me know if you want me to make the CPU tier list for Intel next, and if you want to build a complete PC build, remember you need a graphics card, and that is the most important component when it comes to gaming. So you can watch my video on the best gaming PC builds of the month for every budget and every resolution with no bottlenecks. You will have that one in the top right of the screen, and the reason why I left out some CPUs like the Ryzen 5 5600X3D or Ryzen 5 5600G, well, it's because I just wouldn't recommend you buying them right now. So these are the ones that you may consider buying, even though some of these I do not recommend for gaming, but people usually consider buying these CPUs right now. Thank you guys for watching. If you need personal PC help, that's going to be the top link in the description. You can join my PC community and ask me anything that you want there. Thank you for the support, and I will see you on the next one.